Good afternoon. Rich Nance, Executive Vice President with Open Systems Media, here for this week's 5 Minutes with Discussion. This week, I'm speaking to Tyson Tuttle, who is the CEO of SiLabs. Good afternoon, Tyson. How are you?
Good afternoon, Rich. It's great to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Before we get into what I want to talk about, you've been with SiLabs for a very long time. If I remember right, you started as an engineer at the company. Is that correct?
I did. I started with the company in 1997, so I just celebrated my 20th anniversary here.
Wow, congratulations. In our tech space, that's almost unheard of. That's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, when I started in the engineering world, I moved into marketing, and then I actually also just celebrated 5 years in the CEO position. So it's been a very interesting ride with a lot of different roles all the way along through.
So you went from engineering to marketing. You went from telling the truth to telling non-truth. So which side are you on now that you're the CEO?
Well, all the engineers at the time thought I was going to the dark side, but in reality...
Very good.
Very good. Light, you never know.
Okay. From what I've seen over the last, I'll say maybe 2 years or so, it could not be clearer that you've made a decision that you're going all in on IoT. First of all, would you agree with that assessment?
I would say that our primary focus is around IoT, and I can go back to some of the history, which is about 7 years ago. We started looking at what the long-term growth vectors are in the semiconductor industry, and we really identified 3 areas. One being the internet infrastructure, all the data communications, data center, wireless. The other one being green energy, so power and high voltage, and that fits in with our isolation business. And then IoT becoming our primary vector, as being really the integration of a lot of these components, and also a very, very diverse market with a long runway for growth that is also going to be the primary large growth driver for the company going forward. And so we, about 5 years ago, shifted about 2/3 of our R&D into IoT, and that has now become half of our business, essentially. So it's translated from a strategy now to reality. And so, yes, I would say that, I wouldn't say that we're all in on IoT. We've got a lot of other related things going on, but that is now the primary growth driver of the company.
So let's talk about that runway that you just mentioned. That's something we talk about here a lot. How much life is there in IoT? Is it something that's just going to be around a couple of years? Is it going to be around for a very long time, just maybe without that IoT name attached to it? What are your feelings? Is this something that we have a decade or more of life in?
Yeah, when we look at strategy, we really look at what are going to be the long-term growth drivers, what's going to be a sustainable type business. And I view IoT as really the continuation of a trend that's been going on for a long time and embedded to add intelligence to devices, but now we're really starting to see the addition of connectivity in a big way, of wireless connectivity being added into the microcontrollers and into thousands of different applications, tens of thousands of customers. So a very diverse range of applications, which is different from, for instance, the handset market, which is very consolidated in terms of suppliers and customers. Apple and Samsung and a few others. Whereas in IoT, you're serving, things like metering, lighting, home automation, a myriad of industrial supply chain, cold chain, lots of different applications, factory automation on the industrial side. And every year we see that the number of applications is growing. The space is evolving rapidly. We're starting to see, pockets of high growth in various areas. It's really now, driving the business, but we don't see an end in sight for that. We really see this as a multi-decade growth opportunity for the company, and that we've now been able to position the ship in the right direction and build the infrastructure that's required to leverage that growth going forward.
Does the term IoT become irrelevant as we go forward? Is it just stuff that's connected, and the silly name doesn't need to be attached to it anymore?
Oh, I have been using that word all along. I wouldn't call it a silly name. I think it's a good way to really talk about what we're connecting. It's a lot of the things in our life. It's interesting. I was just on vacation, and I've got I've got relatives and friends who are, non-technical that actually now are starting to understand what IoT is all about. And so I think that, it's important that there's a way of comprehending something that in reality is, it's complex technology, they're complex markets, they're complex applications, but you need a way for people to really understand that, okay, things are getting connected. They are getting connected to the internet. They're becoming more intelligent. And that's creating value and making things more useful, and that is going to be something that creates economic value and is worth investing in and paying attention to.
Okay, that's fair. Is there a specific application area within IoT that you think has the most potential?
Well, we can talk about, more of a short-term horizon. I think that things like metering have been driving IoT, for a number of years. Being able to connect meters to do automated meter reading, to do in-home monitoring. There's been a lot of regulatory action around that. But I think some of the newer things, there's a lot of activity going on in the smart home and home automation and security. Where we're adding IoT functionality and networks into gateways, and then there's a proliferation of end-node devices, everything from sensors to thermostats to security sensors to occupations. There's hundreds of applications within the home, and those ecosystems are starting to develop. That's a very exciting area, and then kind of related to that is the whole lighting, connected lighting, and being able to to add connectivity into the bulbs, into the fixtures, and the benefits that they, in terms of security, in terms of convenience, in terms of health, in terms of sleep, a lot of different things, of being able to control the color and the light and the intensity and automate all of that, and now reaching cost points that are really driving units. Those are places that I think, near term are near-term drivers of IoT. But I think that, if you look out longer term, there are going to be additional areas and applications and use cases as the technology evolves, as the cost gets driven, as the ecosystems develop. There's going to be things that we haven't even thought about yet that create new opportunities.
Okay, so let me lean on your background a little bit as an engineer. Put yourself in the shoes of the engineer, and his manager comes up to him and says, I want you to take this widget and I want you to make it, I want you to connect it to the internet so we can talk to all the devices out there. What's the thing that comes to your mind and says, oh my God, what do I do about this? What's the real hard part about the IoT that really keeps people up at night, an engineer?
I think the first thing I would think is that, thank goodness my manager gets it, because I think that if you don't create a device that's connected, it's really a race to the bottom. It's a you're going to face commoditization, because a lot of the value your competitors are going to be connecting things. So thank goodness, at least you're working at a company that gets that. You really have, if you're developing a consumer product or an industrial product, you really have to think about IoT and connectivity and what that means to the value proposition of what you're making. I think beyond that, then it's especially if you're at if this is not a $100 million or a $10 million type product, but if it's a more industrial product. We view a lot of the value that gets created in IoT is it's really a long tail of applications. And then the question is, how do I afford the R&D to develop the apps? How do I afford the R&D to develop, all the software that's required, the hardware, the certification? A lot of the pieces of creating a connected device are different than a lot of the product development that goes into things that are not connected. There are a lot of new expertise, new techniques, new software, applications, smartphones, cloud, device management, updates, security. There's a lot of things there, and I think those are the questions that I would ask myself. How do I make sure that I develop a world-class, bulletproof product as efficiently and as quickly as possible? And as I'm out looking at a supplier, who's going to be able to deliver that simplicity and quality and cost and be committed for the long term on support to make it happen. So I think that a lot of our customers face the challenge of how do they really accomplish everything that they really aspire to do with a limited budget or a limited time, and to be able to get to market as quickly as possible. And it's across hardware and product design and software and all those different aspects. And it's a lot of really interesting engineering, and it's a really interesting time, I think, to be an engineer and to be alive and to be looking at this green field of application sitting in front of us. But it's also creating a lot of challenge and a lot of problem solving needs to come to bear here to be able to really realize the potential of what we've got in front of us.
Well, I'm not sure that you actually put anybody's mind at ease with that answer, but it is what it is. So we're almost out of time, so I want to go back to your background one more time. Our followers are mostly people who are on the engineering side. What would you say to somebody who has in the back of their head that they want to be the CEO someday? What advice would you give them?
Well, be careful what you ask for. There's a lot of interesting aspects of the job, but a little stress that goes along with it. But I would say that especially engineers, think big picture. Think about the market. Think about the types of products that you're working on. Think about the competition and creating value. I mean, you've got to think about the marketing part and the business part and the finance part, as well as solving interesting engineering problems. And you need to be able to tie all those together to create a successful business. And that's been, an interesting part of my career as I've evolved from being, more on the R&D side and the engineering development side to leading a company. And then I think that the other thing is that, and this is true not just for a CEO job, but just as you move from engineering into management, is really, understand people. I mean, there are just you interact with people every day, and you've got to motivate them and understand how to communicate. And everybody comes at things with, different ideas and different personalities, and understanding people and understanding the art of communication is something that you have to pay attention to. And so, I think some of the most useful classes that I took in college were in economics and in sociology and psychology, although at the time I was more interested in my engineering classes. But, as time has gone on, I've seen the value in a lot of these other fields in the liberal arts that I didn't fully appreciate in the beginning.
Very good. I think that's fantastic advice. I'm afraid we're out of time. I want to thank you, Tyson. That was fantastic. That was Tyson Tuttle. He is the CEO of Silicon Labs, and I'm Rich Nass with Open Systems Media. Have a great day, Tyson.
Thank you very much.